Final lecture. Final lecture. All right. Just FYI, guys, I'm kind of going off a lot of memory slash relearning this from making the PowerPoints because I just didn't have enough time to do a full content review for myself. So if I say something that's obviously wrong, don't write it down and take it as my word. There were some students in my class that would be like, the professor would mess up and then they'd be like, oh, well, you told us it was this, but it was like something that was like obviously just a mistake and a slip up, and it's like, just don't be stupid. If I say something wrong, it's wrong. So, yes, with that being said, also let me know if I make a mistake. I want to go back and correct. Do you remember when I was talking about diabetes, third nerve palsy? Okay. I looked it up, and I want to clarify this because this is really important. Anytime there's a stroke in the microvasculature, all right, so this is a blood vessel. Anytime there's an ischemic stroke, the areas that are most distal to the blood flow are the most severely affected. Okay, in the case of the third cranial nerve, the somatic nerves run I'm sorry, okay. This is a nerve, okay? And the blood vessels are feeding the nerve, okay? Sorry about that. The somatic motor fibers for cranial nerve 3, okay, for eye movement and also opening the eyelid, those fibers run closer to the middle of the nerve, further away from the blood supply, and then the autonomic parasympathetic fibers run closer to the blood supply. So because of that, in microvascular infarctions, there's ischemic damage. The somatic fiber is going to be preferentially adversely affected, and the parasympathetic fibers will actually most times be spared. And this is like diabetes and also sometimes hypertension. So because of that, you will actually get a pupil sparing third nerve palsy. And so they'll have pain. It's painful. They might have a droopy eyelid because the motor fibers to the levator, palpebrae superioris are affected. And then they will have something called ophthalmoplegia. And plegia is muscle weakness, like paraplegic or quadriplegic. So they won't be able to move their eyes. I think the third nerve is responsible for moving the eyes up, down, toward the nose, up toward the nose, up and toward the nose. So when it's knocked out, you get something called a down and out pupil because the other muscles are left unopposed by the third nerve. Anyway, I remember having a UWorld question about this, that the reason diabetic ischemic strokes spare the pupil is because the motor fibers within, remember this whole nerve is cranial nerve 3, right? Within cranial nerve 3 are further away from the blood supply, so they're most affected. Okay, higher functions. I have like 2 slides for this, so I should go quick. The corpus callosum is that thing. Isn't that crazy? That's how one hemisphere communicates to the other. These are called commissural fibers because they cross the commissure. They go from one side to the other. Okay, so you're integrating your logical and analytical left hemisphere, communicating with the more spatially oriented right hemisphere. Yeah, it's a pretty cool view of that. You'll see this in neuroanatomy, which I'll probably be teaching you guys in lab. I'm not sure, but okay. Another aspect of higher functions, association areas are nuts. So we learned about the primary motor cortex, for instance. In front of that, like ventral to that, towards the front of your face, there's several motor association areas. There's the premotor cortex, then there's like a bunch of motor association areas. Same thing with the sensory system. Remember that picture of the occipital lobe that had all the visual association areas? So the association areas are actually, in my opinion, one of the things that make us human, because not only do they allow for storage of information, for instance, like in V1, the primary visual cortex, they allow for integration of information. And then the association areas communicate with all kinds of subcortical centers like the limbic system, the basal ganglia, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus. So yeah, the association areas do a lot of processing. Pretty impressive. The right hemisphere regarding language, the right hemisphere is dominant in facial expression, intonation, which is like recognizing tone inflections, like tone inflections or tone inflections. That's how like, where's the emphasis? I don't know. That's how I picture it. Body language, recognizing and interpreting body language, and like nonverbal communication as well, and spatial tasks. So spatial awareness is something that's interesting, because if your right parietal lobe is damaged, you can get something called hemi-neglect, and that's where, in this case, it would be the contralateral side. So that's where the patient would literally ignore or neglect the entire left side of their visual field. And it's not that they're blind, it's that it doesn't exist. I think one of the best explanations I heard is like when you're looking, your eyes are in the front of your head. When you're looking at something, behind you, like what's behind you? You know, out from your peripheral vision on back, it's kind of like nothing, as if it didn't exist, you know, unless you turned around and looked what was behind you. So that's how I picture hemi-neglect. They just ignore like one side of their visual field. And you'll see pictures that are crazy. Like you ask them to draw a clock, and they'll go like this. So, and then they'll just like draw on one side. I think that's an example of neglect. But then you'll see like if a dog has hemi-neglect and they're eating their bowl of food, you know, that's yummy food, they'll only eat like one side of it. So yeah, pretty interesting. Anyway, the left hemisphere, 93+% of the time, is dominant with respect to language, even if you're in left-handed people. And then because of that, most of the time, Broca's and Wernicke's are going to be in the left hemisphere. Broca's area is in the inferior frontal gyrus, in front of the motor cortex. And, you know, speaking is a motor movement. You're moving your lips, your tongue, all this stuff. So it makes sense it would be in the frontal lobe there. Wernicke's is responsible for comprehension and understanding of language. And that's like an integrative sort of sensory experience, but that is going to be located in mostly the left parietal lobe, but also some people say it encompasses the top part of the temporal lobe too. So Broca's is speech formation. Wernicke's is understanding. And you probably have already heard of this, like Broca's aphasia is when you can't speak. You can understand words other people are speaking to you in like written language, but you can't put out the like motor context for speech formation. Wernicke's, you can't. Wernicke's aphasia, if that's knocked out, you can't understand what's going on, but you can speak fluently. It's just whatever you're saying isn't going to make coherent sense. So this is just a fun little last slide, integrating the corpus callosum. So this was in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, PNAS, one of the funniest journal names ever. I'm going to submit my first goal is to submit to PNAS. That would just be awesome. So this is a quote from the study. After grouping the image by sex and inspecting the differences between the two aggregate male and female pictures, the researchers found that in men, fiber pathways run back and forth within each hemisphere, while in women they tend to zigzag between the left, or logical, and right, or creative sides of the brain. So they found that like females had more commissural fibers, like crossing back and forth between the corpus callosum, between one hemisphere and the other. Now, you'll find in science, you may have already found that it's like Newton's first law of physics: for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So for every study, and I mean almost every study in science, there is an equal and opposite study. Okay, so there are studies that say this difference doesn't exist, but it's nonetheless interesting. In my experience, males can compartmentalize better, and females tend to be more intuitive, more in tune with their emotions. So that this makes sense to me from my experience as a possible like mechanistic explanation for the differences. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting to think about. But that's just an example of a study that talks about the corpus callosum. Okay, we are finished. No worries if you guys don't get to watch all these before class. You have over a week until your test, so cool. See you later.